Well, last week we formally introduced the idea of being a blessing, and we kind of laid out the biblical foundation of it. We laid out where we find that in Scripture, where we pull that from, and so this week we're going to start breaking apart this idea of be a blessing, and so we're going to start in the beginning. We're going to start with the first word here and the idea of what it means to be. To be, just by definition, is to exist as. And I found this definition, I really liked this one. The state of transformation by God's grace, becoming. I like that one. But I want to explain this idea of what it means to be by using a story. I come from a long line of folks who have been in the military in my family, on both sides, men and women who have served. And so I grew up with the understanding of every person in my life that was a soldier was a good person. And so I looked forward to that day when I might become a soldier. I looked forward to being a soldier when I grew up. So I remember that morning, about 3 o'clock in the morning, when I woke up at my parents' house, and we got ready, and I grabbed my bag, and we got in the car, and we drove to Oakland, California, to the MEPS station, Military Entrance and Processing Station. We got there early in the morning. Still don't understand why they make you start that early in the morning, but we got there really early in the morning and spent that whole day being evaluated and analyzed and talked to and poked and prodded and everything else for about 6 hours that day, just walking from room to room to room to room, standing in hallways, waiting in lines, and doing what you're supposed to do, until that day culminated in the moment where I stood in this small wood-lined room with a one-star general in front of us, and we stood and we raised our right hand and we swore our oath to military service. Am I a soldier now? That's a question. I had no uniform. I had never marched a day in my life to this point. I had no training to be a soldier. I had never fired an M16. Was I a soldier? From that moment, literally from that moment, I said goodbye to my parents. I got on a bus. I drove to the airport, and we sat on an airplane, me and 8 other people going into the military together. And we got on a plane, and we went off to basic training, where I spent 3 glorious, fun-filled months getting my uniform, getting to march a lot, getting trained, and finally able to fire an M16. And that whole time culminated in my graduation from basic military training. Do I get to be a soldier now? I felt like one, but not a whole lot of other soldiers seem to treat us like equals. So I then graduated from basic military training, where that next glorious morning at 3:30 in the morning, for some reason, because that's the only time buses leave San Antonio, Texas, I was put onto a bus where I drove all the way to San Angelo, Texas, which should be about a 3.5-hour drive, but it took us 8 hours on a bus. And so we got to San Angelo, Texas, where I started technical school, where I spent the next 13 months of my life training in my Air Force specialty code, my job, and learning and being trained and still marching and still doing all the things that I was taught I would do, still wearing my uniform, buying new uniforms because I realized the one they gave me in basic training doesn't last forever. And you realize that the ones they give you there don't fit everything that you need. So you buy new things and you have new uniforms. And that culminated in my graduation as a military intelligence specialist. Am I a soldier yet? Again, I felt like one, but people kept using this phrase that annoyed me. Wait until you get in the real military. I thought, if I'm not in it yet, what have I been doing for the last 16 months of my life? So then, from my graduation there on that same day, because I got to make my travel arrangements, I chose a 4 o'clock afternoon flight from San Angelo, Texas, back to California, and where I went and I went to my first permanent duty station, where I would participate in on-the-job training, learning how the stuff I spent the last 16 months learning works in the real world. So I worked up from a level 3 apprentice up to a level 5 journeyman, only to continue in my training, moving up in ranks, moving up in skill levels, and living in the never-ending cycle of training and graduating, to train and to graduate, to train and to graduate, to train and to graduate, to train and graduate, which is what military service is. But do you remember why I started this whole cycle? I wanted to be a soldier. That was my desire. And so I think you're hearing the point, you're getting the point, and as far as you go, there will always be room to grow, but at the same time, I was a soldier the day I swore in. The day I lifted my arm and I made that allegiance, I became a soldier with all the rights, with all the responsibilities of a soldier. But I was a better soldier every day after that because of training, because of maturing, because of job experience, because of life experience. None of us here, none of us on this planet, are ever going to be a blessing because we're naturally inclined to do so. That is not part of our natural inclination. It happens because of God's grace at work in us and through us. And when we accept God's grace offered to us, we become agents of the blessing that God has bestowed on us. No magic marker for when we can or should begin to be a blessing. There's not a, we can only be a blessing if we know this much, or you can only ride the ride if you're this tall. There's no marker for that. As far as we go, there's always room to grow. But at the same time, we became an agent of God's blessing the moment we accepted God's grace and love, with all the rights and with all the responsibilities. But we will be better at being a blessing each day because of training, because of maturing, because of life experience, until it becomes how we think and behave. And it becomes who and what we be. Let's continue in worship.